Younger players like Ryan Callahan, Ryan McDonough, Dan Girardi have taken on larger roles. That group has kind of grown together as the core, et cetera, as John Tortorella would put them. And that's where the identity of last year's team came from. It came from guys like Callahan and Brandon Dubinsky, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for the betterment of the team. And obviously, you've got the best goaltender in the world last year, Henrik Lundqvist. That's where it started from, and you can see the team was almost there last year. They obviously got to the Eastern Conference Finals. They made a change in the offseason. They sacrificed some of the depth and gave up Dubinsky and Isamov to get the extra goal scorer that everybody thought they needed, and everybody was crying about in the playoffs last year when they couldn't score enough goals to put away Ottawa and Washington early enough and blah, blah, blah. So they go out and they get Rick Nash. Everybody loved the trade because they didn't have to give up anybody that they didn't think was replaceable, et cetera, et cetera. And now here we are with a team with a slightly different identity. They didn't have the benefit of going through a John Tortorella training camp, and we all know that last year's Rangers team, a lot of the reason that they were able to win those tight, checking, close games was because they were in better condition and better shape than their opponents. They didn't have the benefit of that. They didn't have the benefit of the training camp to kind of develop a slightly different identity with the new players. There was a lot of roster turnover, and they didn't have the opportunity to find or see where those players were going to gel together.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to use that as an excuse because every team had to go through it, but I don't think most of those teams had as much roster turnover as the Rangers did. I knew months ago that there was a good chance this was going to be a real rough start to the season, and that's kind of what we've seen. It's been real choppy, real up and down. They've yet to really find any consistency. But, you know, I think Tortorella has earned some equity from last year's performance. And like I said, it's been a process.
Yeah.
And it culminated, as of now anyway, up, you know, last year, and we want to see it go further. But, you know, this might be just a bump in the road, in my opinion. I don't see a reason to fire him yet. He's earned enough trust in my book that he should be allowed to take the roster into at least next season, give him a full training camp with Rick Nash, et cetera, and see if he can get this team rolling next year. And that's just assuming, you know, they don't accomplish their goals this year.
Yeah.
So firing him now just doesn't – it makes zero sense. Yeah, they're not playing well, but I also see the potential this team can turn it around. Remember, Pittsburgh wasn't playing very well last year, about the midway point under Dan Bilesma, and they caught fire and damn near came from 12 points back and caught the Rangers in the standings. So, you know, teams can turn it around pretty quick when they've got talent, and this team has talent.
Yeah, it definitely does. But, you know, let's hear from the fans that actually want to get rid of Torts, and let's hear from some of the fans that still love Torts and want to keep him here. So the phone number is 347-237-5373, and we have a call right now coming in from Connecticut from the 203 area code. What's going on? You're on the air.
Yeah, how you doing, guys?
We're doing good, man. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, thank you. It's Mark. This is Mark. Yeah, well, I am one of the guys, honestly, that has been wanting to get rid of Tortorella, win or lose. It's got nothing really to do with the current streak. Certainly doesn't help things in my mind. But, you know, the first thing that I'll say is everybody keeps backing up to what we did last year. I personally think that Henrik Lundqvist is single-handedly responsible for much of the success that this organization has seen pretty much since he came into the league 7-8 years ago. And I think Tortorella has benefited from that. I think he's got, you know, he's not really a teaching coach. He is a coach that I think if we had a bunch of core of veterans, not necessarily like 94, but similar to 94, he would do very well. I think when he's got a youth-oriented team, that includes Callahan, I just don't think his impatient style of constant line changing, et cetera, and overusing guys like McDonough and Girardi to the point where they're exhausted is a beneficial thing that's going to get. This team barely made it to the conference finals. Yes, we did. Took us 7 games, both series against a very weak Ottawa team, a number 8 seed, and then a better cap team, but still a team that should not have taken us 7 games. And one of those games, you know, with 6 seconds left, to me, we are playing on the edge. And we finally get a guy like Nash, and I don't see Tortorella adapting to the fact that now this team has 3 elite players. Granted, 2 are slumping, but he's having Nash, you know, in the shooting lane, blocking shots. There are so many fundamental things that I have issues with as far as his coaching style with this type of team, you know, that I think his time was long overdue before this. But again, you know, so I'm not going to. So that's just my take on it. And you guys can respond, you know, as you wish, obviously.
Yeah, Mark. Well, if the Rangers were to get rid of John Tortorella, where would you like to see them go?
Okay, here's what I would do. That's a good question. First of all, unlike '94, where it was we have to win. If it's been 54 years, we have to win. When we had that bad season before '94, Neil Smith went right out and wanted to get either Bowman or Smith or Keenan. Bowman or Al Harvey. We're not in that situation. Only Lundqvist. Lundqvist is the only variable because he's in his prime. Everybody else is up and coming. We don't have to win this year or even next year. We just have to grow. We were growing up until the past couple of years, I think. So here's what I would do. I would hire either Jernander from the Whale or bring Schoenfeld in. Nothing wrong with bringing a guy who's already in the system. I have respect for both those guys. I don't have a lot of respect for Sullivan other than how he handles the defense, but power play obviously is abysmal. So I bring in either one of those two guys, make them interim head coach, just like they did with Ron Smith when Nielsen was a problem with Messier. You wait a year or two, you look for a guy. You don't have to hire the ideal guy out of the gate, but I think getting Tortorella away from this team and, basically a negative influence on a lot of these young players and putting a guy who's more positive, for another year or whatever, and then you find, maybe somebody who's won a cup or I'm not sure. I'm not really sure, but I don't think that just as you get rid of Tortorella doesn't mean you necessarily have to, oh, my God, we have to find the ideal coach. I think it's you first, you know what I mean? You cut your losses, and then you go, and it's a short season, and then you next year sometime or even the following year, you bring in, somebody else. That's my plan.
All right, it's a good point, Mark. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Not a problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Mark made some good points there. A lot of fans are already talking about, if we get rid of Tortorella, let's bring in Lindy Ruff. But then, like Mark said, it's all about going back to the variable of what he did in the past. That's the same thing with Lindy Ruff. Chris, what do you think about hiring a guy like Ken Jernander or bringing back Schoenfeld to, up to the pros here and letting him coach the team if something like that were to happen?
Well, I actually have a couple comments just in regard to his call. There are definitely some things there that I agree with him with, but I think there are also some more things that I disagree with him with. Yes, Hank is obviously, the one variable that you want on your team, the guy that's always going to be there for you to back you up. He's the goalie. He's obviously, the pretty solid guy back there in net. However, I think the last couple of years, in comparison to the first, couple of years that he was in the league, the first couple of years in the league, he had to stand on his head. There's no doubt about that. I think as the team started to learn and to grow more, I think that the defense and the players around Lundqvist started to, learn how to play defense better, learn how to play better in front of him. And as a result, Lundqvist didn't really need to stand on his head nearly as much as he did the first few years of his career. So I sort of disagree that Hank is, he stands on his head constantly. I don't think that's the case. Second of all, the Rangers barely making it to the Eastern Conference Final. I mean, no offense, but if I was any team outside of the playoffs, I would love to make it to the conference final. I don't think there's any such thing as barely making it to the conference final. I think that has a lot to do with the style of play, obviously Lundqvist in goal, and their coaching as well. So I disagree with that fact. And, as far as, the style of play with, Nash going down to block shots, Callahan, so on and so forth, that's the way things are. That's the way they've been under a Torts system, and the players realize that. And I think that's the way it's always going to be. And you know what? If the players hated the negativity that the fans call in and they say that Torts sort of implies, then they wouldn't have had the best season that they've had since '94 last year. So just a couple comments there. But I don't think that bringing in a Jernander or a Schoenfeld is really going to be the answer. I love both guys. I think they have a lot of experience. Obviously, Schoenfeld has professional experience, coaching the Caps in the past. But I just don't think bringing in a new person over Torts is really the answer right now, especially in a shortened season.
Yeah, Glenn, what did you think about Mark's comments on Nicole?
I do disagree somewhat with his assertion that Torts isn't really a teaching coach. A lot of the teaching that goes on is not going to be. We're not going to see that. It's not going to be in game so much. But I'll cite one example of a player who basically his career in the NHL was helped dramatically by Tortorella and his tutelage, and that's Brandon Prust. I don't know how many times Brandon Prust has credited Tortorella for helping him learn how to be a professional hockey player, and he just cashed in to the tune of $10 million last summer with Montreal. And when he came to the Rangers a little more than 2 years before that, he was just a throw-in in that Higgins and Kodalik trade to Calgary. The main piece of that trade was Jokinen. Nobody knew who Brandon Prust was, but in 2 years plus with the Rangers, he turned into a highly sought-after commodity on the free agent market. And you look at what Montreal is doing this year; they're one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, and some of that has to do with Brandon Prust being there. And even though we felt they may have overpaid for him, he was certainly a key player for the Rangers. And Ryan Callahan too. Most of his development has come while Tortorella is here, and we love that guy and everything he does on the ice. And I disagree with the assertion that he's not a good teaching coach. We just don't get to see a lot of the teaching going on. Yeah. And as far as staying within the organization, if Tortorella were to be fired, I would probably go Jernander.
I think you know what I think Jernander has really worked hard and deserves that kind of a promotion even for a little bit.
Yeah, it's the Bilesma formula with Pittsburgh. Same thing they did a couple of years ago when they fired Therrien and hired Bilesma. So if I had to go a direction and pick somebody, I might be willing to do that on an interim basis.
Yeah.
But can I ask a question though? I mean, people say Jernander, maybe bringing Jernander up, but what do we have to base off of that? Just his experience in with the Connecticut Whale? I mean, has he really ever proven himself? How do we know that he's going to be the answer over Tortorella, who obviously has, a lot of NHL experience, playoff experience, Stanley Cup experience for that matter? What would be the one defining reason that he should take over?
I think he's worked for it, to be honest.
Okay.
Just a lot of the work that he did down in Connecticut with the Whale and before that the Wolfpack, it's really showed in a lot of the guys that have come up through the system over the last, let's say, 7 years or 6 years even. I honestly think he's deserving of a promotion like that, even if it is on an interim basis before they find somebody who could, really come in and man the ship in a way a John Tortorella or a Tom Rennie did. That's my opinion on Ken Jernander, and I've said that in the past before when they did first get rid of Tom Rennie before they hired Tortorella, and I said, as an interim basis, I would have been okay with that. So.
Oh, that's fair.
And if they still have designs on going deep into the playoffs this year, the last thing that they'd want to do is bring in a coach that is going to want to implement a new system and everything else. Jernander's obviously familiar with the system that the players are running through right now. He's got a lot of experience with a lot of the players that are currently at the NHL level when he coached them in the AHL. So it would make for a more seamless transition. A lot of Rangers fans are saying they need a new voice. Well, he would be a new voice, but you wouldn't have to scrap the system that they've been playing for the last several seasons either.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it would definitely make more sense than bringing in somebody like Lindy Ruff. So.